The Coca-Cola Company is one of the largest beverage corporations in the world, with its flagship product, Coke, recognized by an estimated 94% of the global population. Its brand is synonymous with happiness and refreshment. However, the company's formation was not based on refreshment. It was rooted in the 19th century patent medicine industry. The company's pivot from a cocaine-infused health tonic to a global soft drink was the result of a revolutionary low-cost distribution model and an unprecedented decades-long investment in marketing. $2,300 for a future empire. Pemberton was an Atlanta pharmacist and Confederate veteran. Addicted to morphine after being wounded in the Civil War, he sought to create a nerve tonic to treat his own ailments and capitalize on the booming patent medicine business. In 1886, he developed a new sweet alcoholic syrup in his backyard, which he called Pemberton's French Wine Coca. When Atlanta enacted temperance legislation that same year, he was forced to reformulate the product, removing the alcohol and adding carbonated water. He combined extracts from the coca leaf and the cola nut. This new concoction was initially marketed not as a soft drink, but as a medical product. It was sold at the soda fountain in Jacobs's Pharmacy in Atlanta for 5 cents a glass, promoted as a brain tonic and a cure for nervous afflictions, headache, neuralgia, hysteria, melancholy. The original formula, as the outline notes, contained a significant amount of cocaine, a common and legal ingredient in tonics of that era, which was not completely removed from the formula until 1903. This initial business model was small, localized, and based entirely on a health claim. Pemberton's innovation was the formula, but he lacked the vision and capital to scale it. He was a pharmacist, not a businessman. Ill and near bankrupt from his morphine addiction, he began selling off the rights to his formula almost immediately. The pivot from medicine to refreshment was driven by a different man entirely, Asa Griggs Candler. Candler was a devout Methodist, a brilliant marketer, and a successful Atlanta businessman. He saw the potential in Pemberton's syrup, but not as a medicine. He saw it as a simple, pleasurable beverage. Between 1888 and 1891, Candler methodically bought out the rights to the formula from Pemberton and his various partners, securing full control of the Coca-Cola name and patent for a total sum of approximately $2,300. Candler's first act was to reposition the brand. He abandoned the medicinal headache cure angle and began marketing Coca-Cola as a delicious and refreshing beverage. He understood that the brand, not just the liquid, was the true asset. In 1887, Pemberton's bookkeeper, Frank Mason Robinson, had created the iconic Spencerian script logo, which Candler immediately trademarked. He invested heavily in what was then a novel strategy, mass market advertising. By the early 1900s, Candler was spending over $50 million on aggressive branding, an unprecedented sum at the time. He plastered the logo on calendars, clocks, serving trays, and tin signs, making the script logo ubiquitous. This marketing blitz, combined with the addictive properties of the caffeine and residual cocaine, was the engine of the company's early growth. This aggressive branding and the protection of the secret formula fueled a revenue growth of 1,000% during the 1910s. How did Coca-Cola build its global empire for almost nothing? While Candler was a marketing genius, he was operationally conservative. His business model was focused on selling the syrup to soda fountains, where it was mixed with soda water by a soda jerk. He was hesitant to enter the expensive, low-margin, high-logistics business of bottling. This reluctance led to the single most important business decision in the company's history. In 1899, two lawyers from Chattanooga, Tennessee, Benjamin Thomas and Joseph Whitehead, approached Candler and asked for the rights to bottle Coca-Cola. Candler, believing bottling was a fad, agreed. He sold them the exclusive nationwide bottling rights for the sum of $1. He retained no ownership of the bottling business. His only profit would be from selling them the syrup at a fixed price. This 1899 contract was the accidental invention of the Coca-Cola global franchise system. Thomas and Whitehead did not build a single national bottling plant. Instead, they acted as parent franchisors. They divided the country into territories and sold the rights to bottle Coca-Cola in those territories to hundreds of local independent entrepreneurs. This created a massive decentralized network of local bottlers. The brilliance of this model was its financial efficiency. Coca-Cola had zero capital expenditure. It did not have to build factories, buy trucks, or hire a delivery workforce. The local bottlers paid for all of it. Coca-Cola's only job was to sell them the syrup and, crucially, to drive national demand through its massive marketing budget. This model, as the outline analyzes, reduced the company's distribution and capital costs by an estimated 50%. It offloaded all the risk onto the franchisees, allowing the parent company to function as a high-profit, low-overhead marketing and concentrate manufacturing business. This two-tiered structure, the parent company and the independent bottlers, became the foundation for its global expansion, which began in Cuba in 1906. By the 1920s, under the subsequent leadership of Robert Woodruff, Coca-Cola was an international phenomenon. It was no longer just a beverage. It was a symbol of a fun, refreshing, and distinctly American way of life. Asa Candler's business model, built on the twin pillars of aggressive marketing and the low-cost bottling franchise system, was a massive financial success. He had taken Pemberton's $2,300 patent and by 1916 had built a company so valuable that he was able to run for and win the office of mayor of Atlanta. His wealth was almost entirely built on the escalating sales of Coca-Cola syrup. However, this rapid growth created new complex problems. Candler, a devout and somewhat mercurial man, was notoriously difficult to manage. His relationship with the parent bottlers, Thomas and Whitehead, was fraught with conflict over the 1899 contract. Candler felt he had made a catastrophic mistake by selling the bottling rights for $1 and locking the company into a fixed low price for its syrup, while the bottlers were becoming millionaires. This tension defined his later years. In 1919, a new era began. Asa Candler, seeking to focus on his political career and philanthropy, sold the Coca-Cola Company to a new consortium of investors led by Ernest Woodruff, an Atlanta banker. The price was $25 million. This 1919 sale marks the true transition of Coca-Cola from a family business to a modern, publicly traded, global corporation. The Woodruff-led syndicate reincorporated the company and in 1919 took it public, listing it on the New York Stock Exchange. Ernest Woodruff's son, Robert W. Woodruff, took over as president of the company in 1923, beginning a 6-decade reign that would define the brand's global identity. Woodruff was a visionary, not a pharmacist or a marketer, but a global strategist. He saw that Candler's marketing, while effective, was too narrow. Woodruff's goal was not just to sell a drink, but to make Coca-Cola a ubiquitous, inescapable part of daily life. Woodruff's first and most significant act was to solve the distribution crisis. The 1899 bottling contract was still a problem, but a bigger issue was that the product was inconsistent. A customer at a soda fountain in Atlanta might get a different tasting, weaker drink than a customer in Chicago. To solve this, Woodruff heavily promoted the six-pack contour bottle carrier, which had been invented in 1923. This was a direct-to-consumer play. It bypassed the soda fountain middleman and encouraged customers to take Coke home. This was a massive pivot into the home refreshment market, a market that would soon dwarf the soda fountain business. His second and most famous contribution was the globalization of the brand during the World War II. This was a marketing and logistical masterstroke. When the U.S. entered the war in 1941, Woodruff issued a public decree. We will see that every man in uniform gets a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents, wherever he is and whatever it costs the company. This was not just patriotism, it was a brilliant business strategy. The U.S. government gave Coca-Cola a special exemption, classifying its product as a wartime essential to boost troop morale. This meant that Coca-Cola's executives, known as technical observers, were given military rank and traveled with the Army. The company was given priority access to sugar and shipping. The effectiveness of this was twofold. First, the U.S. government paid for the construction of 64 new state-of-the-art bottling plants overseas, from North Africa to the Philippines, to supply the troops. When the war ended, Coca-Cola simply purchased this massive government-funded global infrastructure for pennies on the dollar. It had used the war to build its entire post-war global distribution network for free. Second, it cemented the brand's identity with an entire generation of soldiers. Coke was no longer just a soft drink. It was a symbol of home, democracy, and the American way of life. When these 16 million soldiers returned, they brought their brand loyalty with them, creating a massive built-in consumer base that would last for 50 years. This post-war dominance solidified the Coca-Cola system. The company's formation was complete. It had evolved from Pemberton's cocaine-laced nerve tonic to Candler's refreshing soda fountain drink to Woodruff's global symbol of home. The foundation of the company's success was now set. A secret formula protected by patents, a ubiquitous logo, and, most importantly, a low-cost franchise bottling system that offloaded 100% of the production and distribution costs to independent operators, leaving the Coca-Cola Company to function as a pure, high-profit marketing and concentrate business. This system, which generated 1 billion servings per day by the 1990s, was an unassailable financial fortress, but its rigid, unchanging formula would soon become its greatest liability: the $4 million mistake and the real war. The Coca-Cola Company, under the decades-long leadership of Robert Woodruff, had built an unassailable fortress. Its post-war expansion, fueled by the 1899 bottling contract, and its wartime partnership, had made it a global symbol of American capitalism. The company was not just profitable, it was a cultural institution. But this very success created a deep structural arrogance. The company's leadership believed its flagship product, the classic Coke, was infallible. This belief was put to the test in the 1970s and 1980s by an aggressive, younger, and hungrier competitor, PepsiCo. For decades, Pepsi had been a distant second-place brand. But in 1975, Pepsi launched a brilliant and devastatingly effective marketing campaign, the Pepsi Challenge. The strategy was simple. Pepsi representatives set up blind taste tests in public spaces, asking people to drink from 2 unmarked cups, 1 Coke, 1 Pepsi, and choose their favorite. Time and time again, in nationally televised advertisements, consumers, including self-professed lifelong Coke drinkers, chose the sweeter, smoother taste of Pepsi. This campaign was a direct assault on Coca-Cola's secret formula. It suggested that Coke's dominance was not based on taste, but on marketing and nostalgia. For Coca-Cola's leadership, This was a crisis. The Pepsi challenge was not just a gimmick, it was working. Coca-Cola's market share, particularly in the critical U.S. supermarket channel, was steadily eroding. By the early 1980s, Coke was losing its lead. Pepsi was outselling Coke in take-home sales, a market that Robert Woodruff had pioneered. This erosion of dominance led to the single greatest internal drama and most catastrophic product failure in the company's history, the New Coke disaster of 1985. The man in charge during this crisis was Roberto Goizueta, a Cuban-born chemical engineer turned CEO who took over in 1981. Goizueta was not a soda man in the traditional sense. He was a data-driven, unsentimental pragmatist. He looked at the numbers and saw a clear problem. His core product was losing the taste war. He authorized a top-secret, high-stakes project to do the unthinkable, change the 99-year-old secret formula. This project, codenamed Project Kansas, was the company's most expensive and secretive research and development endeavor ever. It cost an estimated $4 million. For 2 years, the company's technicians developed and tested a new formula. This new syrup was designed to be lighter, sweeter, and smoother than the original, with a flavor profile that was almost identical to Diet Coke, and, by extension, to Pepsi. The company's R&D department then conducted the most extensive blind taste tests in history. They tested the new formula on nearly 200,000 consumers. The results were overwhelming and unambiguous. The new, sweeter formula consistently beat both the original Coke and Pepsi in blind taste tests. The data was clear. The new formula was a superior product. Armed with this infallible data, Goizueta made his decision. He was so confident that he decided not just to introduce the new formula, but to permanently replace the original one. On April 23, 1985, the company held a massive press conference in New York City to announce the death of original Coca-Cola and the birth of New Coke. The public response was not appreciative. It was immediate, violent, and emotional. The company's leadership had made a fatal $4 million miscalculation. The blind taste tests had confirmed that the public preferred a sweeter taste, but the tests had failed to measure the one thing that truly mattered: emotional attachment. Coca-Cola's leadership had forgotten what it had spent 100 years and billions of dollars teaching the public. Coca-Cola was not just a drink. It was a cultural icon. It was a symbol of home for soldiers in World War II. It was a piece of 1950s nostalgia. It was an immutable part of the American identity. By changing the formula, the company was not seen as innovating. It was seen as committing an act of cultural vandalism. The backlash was a corporate nightmare. The company's headquarters in Atlanta was flooded with over 400,000 angry phone calls and letters. Customers were not just disappointed, they were in mourning. They were betrayed. Protest groups formed. People began hoarding cases of old Coke, driving up prices on the black market. In one of the most famous examples of the backlash, a man in Seattle founded the Old Coke Drinkers of America and began a class action lawsuit to force the company to bring back the original. The internal drama was intense. The company's leadership was in a state of shock. Their perfect data had led to a catastrophic failure. Pepsi, meanwhile, was victorious. In a series of ruthless advertisements, Pepsi's CEO, Roger Enrico, declared that they had won the Cola Wars. The internal conflict over the $4 million R&D waste was immense, as was the immediate financial fallout. This disaster, however, was not the only challenge the company faced. While New Coke was the most visible internal drama, a slower, more persistent external challenge was growing: public health. The very product that made the company billions, sugar-sweetened beverages, was beginning to be identified as a primary driver of the obesity and diabetes epidemics. This was not a fad. It was a fundamental shift in public and governmental perception. This external challenge, which began to gain serious traction in the 1990s and 2000s, was a direct threat to the company's entire business model. The company was accused of being the new tobacco, marketing an addictive and unhealthy product directly to children. This pressure led to legal and social battles around the world. The new Coke disaster, while a massive and humiliating public failure, was ultimately a short-term problem. The company was able to reverse its decision within 79 days and paradoxically emerged with a stronger, revitalized brand. However, this internal crisis masked the rise of a far more dangerous, permanent, and intractable external challenge: public health. The very product that made the company billions, sugar-sweetened beverages, was beginning to be identified by the global medical community as a primary driver of the obesity and type 2 diabetes epidemics. This was not a Pepsi challenge that could be won with a marketing campaign. This was a fundamental scientific assault on the company's core product. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, as obesity rates in the West skyrocketed, Coca-Cola, as the world's largest sugar water seller, became public enemy number one for health advocates. The company was accused of being the new tobacco, using its massive marketing budget to hook children on an addictive and unhealthy product. This external pressure created a new and far darker internal drama. Instead of adapting its business model, the company's leadership chose to fight. It adopted a strategy taken directly from the tobacco industry: manufacture scientific doubt. The most damaging example of this strategy was the company's covert funding of the Global Energy Balance Network. In 2015, an investigation by the New York Times revealed that Coca-Cola had provided millions of dollars in funding to create this independent scientific organization. The GEBN, led by respected university professors, promoted a specific company-friendly message. The key to the obesity crisis was not diet, but energy balance. This was a deliberate attempt to mislead the public by muddying the scientific waters. The GEBN's message was, in effect, that it was okay to drink Coca-Cola as long as you went for a run afterward. The revelation of this secret funding was a public relations disaster. It exposed the company as a bad faith actor, a corporation willing to manipulate science to protect its profits. The resulting backlash was intense, forcing the GEBN to disband almost immediately and causing a deep internal conflict over the company's ethical compass. This, as the data indicates, was not an isolated incident. The company's long-term strategy of sponsoring research to produce pro-soda anti-regulation studies has become a permanent part of its business model and a massive legal and reputational liability. While the company was fighting a war of ideas against health advocates in the West, it was simultaneously fighting a war of resources in its emerging markets. This second external challenge centered on the accusation of global monopoly power and water exploitation. The Coca-Cola franchise system, which had been its greatest asset, was now its greatest liability. This system relies on a global network of independent bottlers who are given the exclusive right to bottle and sell Coke in a specific territory. These bottlers require one primary resource: water. They must pump billions of gallons of water from local sources. In countries like India, this created a massive social and environmental crisis. In the early 2000s, residents in communities like Plachamada, Kerala, began to protest that a new massive Coca-Cola bottling plant was draining the local aquifer. Farmers alleged that their wells had run dry, their crops had failed, and the water table had been depleted. Also, a multinational corporation could sell sugared water back to them. The company was also accused of polluting the remaining groundwater with its industrial discharge. This conflict in India was not an isolated protest. It was a decades-long legal and social war. It led to massive boycotts, government-ordered shutdowns of the plant, and a series of legal battles that cost the company tens of millions of dollars, and did irreparable damage to its brand in a key growth market. A similar crisis erupted in Mexico, one of the company's largest and most profitable markets per capita. In communities in states like Chiapas, residents accused the Coca-Cola bottling plant of consuming over 1 million liters of water per day, often with preferential access granted by the government, while the local population suffered from chronic water shortages. This narrative of a wealthy American corporation taking a community's essential water, mixing it with high fructose corn syrup, and selling it back to them as a product, contributing to the world's highest diabetes rates, was devastating. These external challenges, the health crisis in the West and the resource crisis in the developing world, are the new normal for Coca-Cola. The new Coke failure of 1985 was a 79-day-long, self-inflicted wound. This new multi-front war is permanent. As the data analyzes the resulting boycotts and social pressures, which have continued from 2023 to 2025, are responsible for 2 to 5% regional sales drops. More significantly, the cost of fighting these legal, social, and regulatory battles has become a permanent, massive line item on the company's balance sheet, estimated at over $100 million per year in legal and compliance costs. The company, which had built its empire on the simple promise of happiness, was now facing a global backlash that accused it of creating obesity, diabetes, and drought, turning disaster into victory. Goizueta, to his credit, did not double down on his mistake. He made a second equally historic decision. He reversed course. In a stunning public surrender just 79 days after the new Coke launch, the company held another press conference on July 11, 1985. An executive announced that the original formula was returning to the shelves, rebranded as Coca-Cola Classic. This public apology and reversal had an unexpected and powerful effect. It was a massive, accidental public relations victory. The public, which had felt betrayed, now felt heard. They had won their battle against the faceless corporation. Their emotional connection, which the company had ignored, was now validated. This event, far from destroying the brand, actually re-cemented its cultural power. Sales of Coca-Cola Classic surged, and the brand quickly regained its dominance over Pepsi, with data showing a subsequent 10% increase in sales. The new Coke failure, paradoxically, had saved the company by reminding its leadership that they were not in the taste business. They were in the nostalgia and identity business. But this victory was just putting out one fire. The other fire, the fact that the entire world was starting to see sugar as the new enemy, was still burning. The truth is, the company's real, long-term survival plan wasn't the 1985 Classic reversal. It was a move they had already made 3 years before the new Coke disaster even began. In 1982, Coca-Cola made its first and most significant defensive pivot, the launch of Diet Coke. For 96 years, the Coca-Cola name and its formula were considered sacred. The idea of extending the Coke trademark to a new product was heretical. But Goizueta, a pragmatist, understood that the health-conscious consumer of the 1980s was a new, permanent, and growing market. He made the gamble. Diet Coke was an immediate, runaway success. It was a product perfectly timed for the era, giving consumers permission to drink a soft drink without the guilt of sugar. This single launch created an entirely new, multi-billion-dollar category, and for the first time, insulated the company from its primary criticism. The new Coke failure actually reinforced the importance of this diversification. The company realized it could no longer survive as a single product entity. It needed a portfolio to address different consumer needs. This led to the next major innovation. The company's research showed that while Diet Coke was a success, its taste and diet name were heavily skewed toward female consumers. Male consumers, particularly in the 18 to 35 demographic, wanted the full flavor of classic Coke, but with zero sugar. This insight led to the 2005 launch of Coke Zero. This was a brilliant piece of marketing and product segmentation. Coke Zero was packaged in a black masculine can and marketed with a simple, direct promise: real Coke taste, zero sugar. It was a direct competitor to itself, designed to capture the demographic that Diet Coke had missed. This dual-pronged strategy of diet and zero, combined with the public apology for new Coke, was the foundation of the brand's recovery. The company was no longer just the classic brand. It was a total beverage company. This new diversified portfolio, which included reducing sugar by 30% in some of its other products, rebuilt public trust and fueled the massive 15% sales growth seen in the 1990s. This new, robust portfolio of products, classic, diet, zero, and others, was the foundation for the company's 21st century global strategy. It was no longer just exporting Coke, it was exporting a total beverage solution. The reversal of new Coke and the successful diversification into diet and zero stabilized the Coca-Cola brand in its home market. With a firm foundation in the United States, the company focused on its primary growth engine, global dominance. This strategy, which had been in place since Robert Woodruff's post-World War II expansion, was accelerated in the 21st century to counteract the slowing, health-conscious markets in North America and Europe. The company's modern success, which has led to operations in over 200 countries and annual revenues of $45 billion by 2024, is built on the 1899 bottling model, but it has been adapted for the modern world. The core strategy is glocalization. Unlike the new Coke era, when the company tried to impose a single uniform product on its consumers, the modern Coca-Cola Company is a far more flexible, decentralized entity. While the classic Coke formula remains globally consistent, the company's true growth comes from its ability to adapt to local tastes. This is the key to its 12% annual growth in Asia and its 15% growth in the ASEAN region. This strategy is twofold. First, the company heavily promotes and distributes its local brands. In Japan, its best-selling product is not Coke, it is Georgia, a canned coffee brand. In India, it owns Thumbs Up, a popular local cola, and Limca, a lemon-lime soda. The company learned that it is more profitable to acquire beloved local brands than to compete with them. Second, it tailors its core products to match local palates and supply chains. In Japan, the company has hundreds of products that exist nowhere else, from green tea Coke to specialty fruit-flavored sodas. This glocalization strategy also includes adapting to local economic realities. The 2025 launch of cane sugar-based products in certain markets is not just a premium offering. It is a direct response to inflation and the volatility of high fructose corn syrup, allowing the company to hedge its supply chain costs. This entire global operation is managed by the company's digital transformation. The Coca-Cola app and its associated loyalty programs are the new front line of consumer engagement. This digital ecosystem, which has driven a 20% increase in digital transactions, is the tool that enables globalization at scale. The app allows the company to gather massive amounts of consumer data in every market, test new products, and most importantly, deliver personalized, direct-to-consumer marketing. The analysis of Coca-Cola's modern success is clear. The new Coke disaster was the company's I-75 moment, a near-death experience that forced it to abandon its rigid, arrogant, one-size-fits-all model. The company that emerged is more flexible, more data-driven, and more diversified. It successfully recovered from the 2015 Global Energy Balance Network scandal by pivoting to Coke Zero and other low-sugar options. It no longer relies on just one secret formula. Its current recovery and dominance are built on a portfolio approach. It is now, in its own explicit financial terminology, a total beverage company. It has successfully captured 25% of the global soft drink market by selling everything from full-sugar classic Coke to premium zero-sugar energy drinks and bottled water. This diversified, global, and data-driven model is what has made it one of the most resilient and profitable corporations in the world. When Coke became music, sports, and fashion, the total beverage company model, which saved the Coca-Cola brand in the 1990s and 2000s, was a massive financial success. It established a global portfolio of products, from classic Coke to Diet, Zero, and bottled water, that successfully defended the company against the first wave of health criticisms. By 2024, this strategy had solidified its position, capturing 25% of the global soft drink market and generating $45 billion in annual revenue. But this success masked a deep structural problem. The total beverage model was a defensive strategy. It did not solve the core issue. The company's flagship product and its very name was still synonymous with sugar. In its most valuable markets, North America and Europe, sales of its core carbonated sugar-sweetened beverages were facing a terminal decline. The public health crisis linking the product to obesity and diabetes was no longer a fringe argument. It was the dominant consumer media and governmental narrative. The company's primary challenge was no longer competition from Pepsi. It was cultural irrelevance. The Gen Z demographic, the new, all-important consumer base, was both health-conscious and famously ad-resistant. They were abandoning sugary sodas, and they instinctively ignored traditional, high-budget television advertising. The company's core business, as the data indicates, was facing market saturation, with growth slowing to just 2% annually in these mature markets. Coca-Cola's leadership recognized that its $1 billion annual R&D budget could not just be for inventing new low-sugar drinks. It had to be for inventing a new identity. The company had to execute a new, far more abstract pivot. It needed to stop being a beverage company that sold products and become a cultural brand that sold experiences. This was a deliberate multi-billion-dollar diversification away from its own core product and into new industries, music, fashion, and sports. This was a high-stakes, high-cost strategy to launder the brand's image, washing away the health crisis narrative by associating itself with happiness and cultural relevance. The first and most significant pillar of this new strategy was the pivot into the music industry. This was a natural fit. Coca-Cola's brand identity has been linked to music since its 1971 "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing" advertisement, one of the most famous commercials ever made. But the modern strategy is fundamentally different. The company is no longer just using music to advertise, it is becoming a music company. The flagship of this strategy is Coke Studio. This was not an American invention. It began in 2008 as a small experimental television program in Pakistan. The concept was simple and brilliant. It brought together the country's best traditional folk and classical musicians with modern pop and rock artists. It was not a battle of the bands, it was a fusion. The result was a high production value, professionally produced music series that was, by all accounts, musically and artistically credible. It was not a 30-second jingle. It was a 1-hour high art program that was sponsored by Coca-Cola, not produced by it. The success was immediate and profound. Coke Studio became the most important cultural program in the country, a rare unifying force. It was a massive, patriotic hit. Coca-Cola's leadership saw the blueprint. They realized that owned content was more powerful than purchased advertising. The Coke Studio model was then globalized and exported around the world. It launched in India, the Philippines, and across Africa, each one adopting the same formula. Use our money to produce high-quality, authentic fusions of your own local music. This strategy has now evolved into a global powerhouse. As the data for 2025 indicates, this has culminated in the Coke Studio ASEAN with UMG partnership. This is no longer just a sponsored TV show. It is a full-fledged music platform. The company has even launched its own record label, Real Thing Records, which signs and promotes artists discovered on the platform. The reason for this, as the data analyzes, is a direct assault on the Gen Z demographic. This generation, which is skeptical of inauthentic branding, responds to authentic cultural content. Music, as a platform, provides a 30% higher engagement rate than traditional video advertising. This $50 million per campaign investment is a sophisticated way to counter the health criticism narrative. By associating the Coca-Cola logo with authentic, diverse, and creative local music, the company is actively shifting its brand identity from sugar to culture. The effectiveness is undeniable. The Coke Studio platform, as a global entity, now generates over 1 billion views per season. It has been a direct driver of sales, responsible for a 5 to 10% increase in its target markets. In the ASEAN region, it drove a 12% sales increase among young consumers. It is a high-cost, high-reward strategy that has successfully embedded the brand in the cultural fabric of its most important growth markets. This flagship-owned platform is supported by two other music-based strategies. The first is platform partnership, specifically with Spotify. Coca-Cola was one of the first global brands to form a deep partnership with the streaming giant. This is not just about buying banner ads, it is about native integration. The company curates dozens of branded playlists on Spotify, such as Coke in a Song or Summer Party, that are designed to associate the brand with moments of happiness and social connection. This is a subtle data-driven strategy to capture consumer attention in an ad-free environment. The second is live event sponsorship. The company is one of the largest sponsors of music festivals in the world, including, as the data notes, the Essence Festival in New Orleans. This is a community play. By sponsoring an event so central to Black culture in America, Coca-Cola is aligning itself with a specific high-value demographic, building deep brand loyalty that goes beyond the product itself. This entire multi-billion-dollar pivot into music is a sophisticated long-term strategy to decommodify the brand. It is an attempt to make the brand uncancelable by so deeply embedding it in the cultural fabric that it becomes synonymous with music, celebration, and local identity. This is the new high-cost, high-stakes model of 21st century marketing. The pivot into music was a sophisticated top-down strategy to build cultural credibility by creating and funding high art platforms like Coke Studio. The second pillar of this diversification strategy was a more traditional bottom-up approach, the systematic long-term colonization of global sports. This was a parallel multi-billion-dollar investment to ensure that the Coca-Cola logo was inextricably linked to moments of passion, unity, and peak human achievement. This was not a new strategy, but its intensification and reason for existing changed in the 21st century. The company's reason for this pivot, as noted in the user outline, was twofold. First, to achieve massive global exposure, and second, to lifestyleize the brand, thereby insulating it from its core product's health criticisms. Coca-Cola's sports strategy is one of the most successful and long-running marketing campaigns in corporate history. Its two crown jewels are the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup. The company's relationship with the Olympic Games is its oldest and deepest partnership. It began in 1928 at the Amsterdam Olympics, when a freighter shipped 1,000 cases of Coca-Cola to be sold to athletes and fans. This makes Coca-Cola the longest-serving continuous partner of the Olympic movement. This partnership is not just about buying banner ads, it is a deep infrastructural integration. Coca-Cola funds athletes, sponsors the Olympic torch relay in countless countries, and runs the on-site exclusive beverage sales for the entire event. The effectiveness of this 90-plus year investment is staggering. It aligns the brand not just with sports, but with the specific high-minded ideals of the Olympic movement: unity, excellence, and global harmony. This is a sophisticated brand shield. When the company is under attack in the media for its high sugar content or its water exploitation in India, it can simultaneously run advertising that showcases its 90-year support of global unity and athletic achievement. This has a direct, measurable impact on brand perception. As the user outline notes, this long-term strategy is responsible for a 15% increase in brand value, helping to push the company's total valuation over $260 billion by 2024. The second, and arguably more powerful partnership, is with FIFA for the World Cup. This partnership, which began in 1978, gives Coca-Cola exclusive beverage rights to the single most watched event on Earth. The effectiveness of this is purely a numbers game. The FIFA World Cup, as the user outline analyzes, provides access to over 4 billion viewers in a single month-long period. This is not just about ad exposure. Coca-Cola's contract gives it field-side branding, meaning its logo is the permanent, unavoidable backdrop for every goal, every replay, and every historic moment of the tournament. More importantly, it gives them the FIFA World Cup Trophy Tour. Coca-Cola is the only brand allowed to take the solid gold $20 million trophy on a global tour, bringing it to dozens of developing nations. This allows the company to create once-in-a-lifetime local media events where presidents and prime ministers line up to be photographed with the trophy next to a Coca-Cola logo. It is a level of access and cultural integration that no competitor can match. This massive multi-billion-dollar sports portfolio is the foundation of the brand's global identity. It serves as a constant positive white noise of cultural relevance. It ensures that for billions of people, the brand is associated not with diabetes or obesity, but with the peak human emotions of triumph, national pride, and celebration. This provided the brand safety and the massive capital needed for its third, more recent, and trend-focused diversification, the pivot into high fashion. The pivots into music and sports were the two primary multi-billion-dollar pillars of Coca-Cola's cultural diversification. Music provided authentic local engagement, while sports provided massive, unifying global exposure. However, the company identified a third equally important cultural arena that it needed to conquer to secure the Gen Z demographic: fashion and apparel. This pivot was not about selling cheap branded merchandise at souvenir shops. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered strategy to lifestyle-ize the brand. The reason for this was to solve a core marketing problem. Music and sports were effective, but they were sponsorships of other people's platforms. The fashion pivot was about making the Coca-Cola brand itself the product, a wearable high-status item. It was a direct attempt to rebrand Coke from a boomer beverage to a vintage, cool, retro icon for a new generation. This strategy was executed in two distinct waves. First, a high-fashion pivot to build cultural credibility, followed by a mass-market pivot to monetize that credibility. The first and most critical move was the collaboration with Kith. Kith is not a mass-market retailer. It is one of the most influential high-end hype streetwear brands in the world, founded by sneaker icon Ronnie Fieg. A partnership with Kith is a signal to the entire fashion industry that a brand is cool. In 2016, Coca-Cola launched its first Kith X Coca-Cola capsule collection. This was not a small-scale test. It was a massive multi-season partnership. The effectiveness of this was not measured in sales volume, but in hype. The collection, which featured high-end $150 hoodies, vintage-style denim jackets, and co-branded Converse sneakers, sold out instantly. It was a massive hype event covered by publications like Hypebeast and High Snobiety. It was the ultimate cool by association move. Coca-Cola had successfully paid a high-fashion gatekeeper to declare its 100-year-old logo fashionable. This high-fashion cosign was the crucial first step. With this new cool equity established, Coca-Cola executed the second wave of its strategy: mass market monetization. After Kith had made the logo cool, the company launched much larger, more accessible collaborations with global fast fashion retailers like H&M, Uniqlo, and Forever 21. These collections were not about hype. They were about volume. They took the vintage retro aesthetic that Kith had legitimized and sold it at an affordable price to the masses. This is the source of the 5% ancillary revenue increase noted in the user's data. This fashion and merchandise business is a new high-margin and operationally simple revenue stream. Like KFC's similar pivot, this business is a brilliant risk reduction tool. It is completely insulated from the company's core risks. It is not vulnerable to sugar taxes, health criticisms, or water shortages. It is a stable, high-profit business that launders the brand's image while simultaneously providing a financial shield for the low-margin, high-criticism core product. However, this diversification, while effective, has created a new and potent risk. By successfully pivoting from a simple beverage company into a global cultural icon, Coca-Cola has also transformed itself into a global political symbol. This new status makes it a massive, high-profile target for geopolitical boycotts. The 2024 Palestine-related boycott is the most recent and damaging example. Because the brand is seen as a core symbol of America, it became a primary target for pro-Palestinian activists across the Middle East, North Africa, and in key markets like Turkey and Pakistan, as well as on U.S. college campuses. This was not a health criticism. It was a political one. The company was accused of operating in Israel, and its cultural dominance made it an easy and effective target. The effectiveness of this boycott, as the user data notes, was a direct and measurable 2% drop in regional sales. This demonstrates the double-edged sword of this diversification. The same global icon status that allows the company to partner with the Olympics, And FIFA also makes it uniquely vulnerable to political conflicts that have nothing to do with its actual product. This new political risk is a permanent cost of its cultural brand strategy, the $11 billion shopping spree, the high-profile diversifications into music, sports, and fashion were a sophisticated external-facing strategy to rebrand the company's image. These $50 million campaigns were designed to launder the Coca-Cola name, associating it with culture and happiness, to defend it against the public health narrative. However, this was only one half of the company's diversification strategy. The other half was an internal, far more significant and operationally complex pivot, the diversification of its product portfolio. This was a direct, long-term response to the core business problem of market saturation and the rising tide of anti-sugar sentiment. Company leadership, particularly after the near-death experience of New Coke in 1985, understood that the future of the company could not rely solely on the carbonated soft drink category. The company's goal was to evolve from a soda company into a total beverage company that owned every part of the share of throat, from morning breakfast to post-workout hydration. The company's first major step in this portfolio diversification occurred much earlier, in 1960, with the acquisition of the Minute Maid Corporation. This was a $59 million deal that at the time was a significant departure for Coca-Cola. The reason for this acquisition was clear. It was a strategic move into the non-carbonated at-home breakfast market. This was a market that Coca-Cola's core impulse buy refreshment product did not serve. The effectiveness of this pivot was threefold. First, it instantly gave Coca-Cola a dominant foothold in the juice and juice drink category, a market that was perceived by 1960s consumers as inherently healthy and natural. This provided the company's portfolio with its first health halo. Second, it diversified the company's revenue stream away from soda fountains and vending machines and into the high-volume supermarket grocery aisle. Third, it provided a new separate platform for innovation, leading to the creation of Hi-C and other juice brands. This acquisition was the first signal that the Coca-Cola Company was a holding company, not just a single brand. It also set the stage for the coming juice wars with PepsiCo, which would later acquire Tropicana and become its chief competitor in this new category. A second, more aggressive diversification occurred in 1990 with the launch of Powerade. This was not an acquisition. It was a direct, from-scratch assault on an existing high-growth category that was at the time dominated by a single competitor, Gatorade. The reason for this pivot was defensive. The sports drink market, created and owned by Gatorade, was exploding. This was a direct threat to Coca-Cola. Every bottle of Gatorade sold was a share of throat that Coca-Cola was losing. This new category, hydration, was seen as a healthy alternative to soda. Coca-Cola was losing the entire athletic demographic. Coca-Cola's strategy was not just to launch a Me Too product. It was to leverage its single greatest asset, its bottling and distribution system. The 1899 franchise contract had created the most powerful beverage distribution network on Earth. Coca-Cola was able to place Powerade in millions of convenience stores, vending machines, and supermarkets almost overnight, a feat no startup could ever accomplish. The effectiveness of this pivot was a long, slow, and grinding war. Powerade, which was often sold at a lower price point than Gatorade, never won the sports drink war. Gatorade, which had first-mover advantage and deep ties to professional sports leagues, consistently maintained a dominant 60 to 70% market share. However, Powerade successfully did what it was designed to do. It broke the monopoly. It carved out a stable and highly profitable 20 to 30% share of the multi-billion-dollar market. This diversification was critical. It established Powerade as a billion-dollar brand in its own right and provided the company with a powerful non-carbonated asset to compete for the health-conscious consumer. This move, combined with the earlier Minute Maid acquisition, was the true foundation of the total beverage strategy. It proved that the company's power was not just its secret formula, but its ability to use its global distribution network to enter and conquer any beverage category it chose. These internal diversifications into juice and sports drinks were less fun than the external pivots into music and fashion, but they were far more significant to the company's bottom line. They were the financial engine that would fund the company's next and even more aggressive acquisitions. The pivots into Minute Maid and Powerade were the foundational moves of Coca-Cola's total beverage company strategy. They were successful, multi-billion-dollar diversifications that secured the company's dominance in the breakfast and hydration categories. However, as the 21st century progressed, the public health crisis surrounding sugar, as outlined in the user's initial prompt, became an existential threat. The company's leadership recognized that juice drinks and sports drinks were still high in sugar. They were not a true solution to the health criticism. To survive, the company had to make a much more aggressive and fundamental pivot. It had to diversify into zero-sugar, non-soda categories. This began the third and most expensive wave of its product diversification, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition spree to conquer water, coffee, and energy drinks. The first and most obvious target was bottled water. This was a high-growth category, and it was the perfect antidote to the obesity narrative. The company's primary entry was Dasani, launched in 1999. Dasani was not spring water. It was a masterpiece of marketing and industrial engineering. It was simply local municipal tap water, filtered, purified, and then remineralized with a proprietary blend of minerals to give it a clean and consistent taste. The effectiveness of this was purely financial. The company was taking a near-free resource, running it through a filter, and selling it back to the public at a 10,000% markup. This model was incredibly profitable. However, this diversification also led to one of the brand's most humiliating public failures, the 2004 UK launch of Dasani. The British press discovered that the pure new water was just filtered tap water from Sidcup, Kent. The public ridicule was intense. The crisis was then compounded when the UK's Food Standards Agency found that a bad batch of the water contained carcinogenic bromate levels, forcing a massive 500,000 bottle recall. The brand was permanently pulled from the UK market, a rare and total failure for the company. To counter this low-end perception, Coca-Cola also diversified upmarket into the premium water category. In 2007, it acquired Glacéau, the parent company of Smart Water and Vitamin Water, for a staggering $4.1 billion. This was a massive investment. The reason was to buy Cool. Smart Water were the dominant high-margin lifestyle brands. This acquisition was a direct pivot to capture the high-end health-conscious consumer that Dasani could not. The second and even larger pivot was into coffee. Coca-Cola had dominated the morning juice market with Minute Maid, but it had no presence in the world's other dominant breakfast beverage. This was a massive daily share of throat that it was losing to competitors like Starbucks and Nestlé. In 2018, the company made one of the largest acquisitions in its history. It bought the global coffee chain Costa Coffee for $4.9 billion. This was a brilliant multi-pronged diversification. The reason was not just to sell coffee. First, it instantly gave Coca-Cola a global brick-and-mortar retail footprint of over 3,400 stores, turning it into a direct competitor to Starbucks. Second, it gave the company a world-class supply chain for sourcing, roasting, and distributing coffee beans. Third, and most importantly, it gave Coca-Cola a premium brand and the expertise it needed to launch ready-to-drink canned and bottled coffee beverages through its existing unparalleled global distribution network. This $4.9 billion purchase was a pivot into retail, logistics, and a new at-home and on-the-go beverage category all at once. The final pivot was into the high-growth, high-margin, and youth-focused energy drink market. This category, dominated by Red Bull, was a direct competitor to Coke's caffeine business. In 2014, Coca-Cola made a $2.15 billion strategic investment to acquire a 16.7% stake in Monster Beverage Corporation. This was a masterful move. Instead of trying to compete with the dominant cool energy brand, Coca-Cola partnered with it. The deal transferred ownership of Coke's own failing energy drinks to Monster, and in return, Coca-Cola became the exclusive global distributor for Monster's products. The effectiveness of this was, again, a leverage of its core strength. Coca-Cola didn't need to spend $1 on marketing. It just had to put Monster cans into its millions of vending machines and delivery trucks, taking a massive cut of the profits. This portfolio diversification, Minute Maid for juice, Dasani/Smart Water for water, Powerade for sports, Costa for coffee, and Monster for energy, was the internal manifestation of the total beverage company strategy. It was the necessary, structural change that ensured the company's financial survival, even as its core sugary soda business faced permanent decline. The dual-engine machine and the lesson in emotion. The diversification of the Coca-Cola Company, therefore, must be understood as a sophisticated two-pronged strategy that was executed in parallel. The first prong, as analyzed, was the cultural pivot. This was the external-facing, high-cost, high-profile move into music, sports, and fashion. This strategy, with its $50 million per campaign cost, was not designed to generate its own revenue. It was a massive marketing expense designed to achieve one critical abstract goal: to rebrand the company's image. It was a direct response to the public health crisis and the sugar narrative. By partnering with FIFA, the Olympics, KITH, and Spotify, Coca-Cola was laundering its brand identity. It was deliberately associating its logo with happiness, global unity, athletic achievement, and cultural cool. This strategy became a protective shield for the brand. It was designed to protect the core Coca-Cola name from its own core product, ensuring the brand's value remained high even as the product itself was under attack. The second prong was the portfolio pivot. This was the internal-facing, operationally complex, multi-billion-dollar move into juice, water, sports drinks, coffee, and energy. This was not a marketing strategy. This was a financial survival strategy. This was a direct response to market saturation and the 2% annual growth in the core soda market. This pivot was a cold, hard financial calculation. It was a $4.1 billion bet on Smart Water, a $4.9 billion bet on Costa Coffee, and a $2.15 billion bet on Monster. This strategy was designed to ensure that even if sales of classic Coke went to zero, the Coca-Cola Company would still own a dominant multi-billion-dollar share of every other beverage category. The true genius of the company's modern business model is how these two pivots work in perfect, symbiotic harmony. The cultural pivot provides the brand halo of happiness and culture. The portfolio pivot provides the health halo of total beverage options. This creates a flywheel. The massive stable profits from the portfolio pivot are the engine that generates the billions of dollars in cash needed to fund the massive, expensive cultural pivot. In turn, the cultural pivot provides the brand shield that protects the entire company, including the new healthy brands, from public criticism and geopolitical boycotts. The 5% ancillary revenue from fashion merchandise is simply a small financial bonus on top of this much larger, more integrated corporate machine. This two-pronged diversification has been highly effective. It has created a resilient $45 billion a year corporation that is insulated from any single point of failure. But it has also, as the data indicates, created a new set of complex risks. The cultural pivot has made the company a political symbol. This has made it a prime target for geopolitical boycotts, like the 2024 Palestine-related action, which directly caused a 2% regional sales drop. This is a new risk, a cost of cultural dominance that the company must now manage indefinitely, adding to its $100 million in annual legal costs. The portfolio pivot has also created new vulnerabilities. The $4.1 billion acquisition of Glacéau was a massive bet on a brand that was itself immediately attacked by health advocates for being sugary water disguised as a health drink. The $4.9 billion acquisition of Costa Coffee was a direct pivot into the high-cost, high-risk brick-and-mortar retail business, a low-margin industry that Coca-Cola had deliberately avoided for 100 years. The company's new diversified model is more resilient, but it is also far more complex, and it has swapped the simple risk of selling soda for the far more complicated risks of geopolitics, retail management, and the high-fashion hype cycle. The history of the Coca-Cola Company, from a cocaine-laced patent medicine in 1886 to a $45 billion a year total beverage corporation, provides a series of clear, hard-won, and often contradictory lessons. The company's global dominance is not the result of a single protected formula, but of its complex and often painful ability to adapt, pivot, and, most importantly, to recover from its own massive failures. The modern corporation is a direct product of the lessons learned from its deepest crises. The most significant, painful, and defining lesson in the company's 130-plus year history was the New Coke disaster of 1985. This event is the key to understanding the company's modern psyche. It was a catastrophic, self-inflicted wound, born from a place of corporate arrogance and a fundamental misunderstanding of its own product. The company's leadership, led by the data-driven CEO Roberto Goizueta, had become fixated on the Pepsi challenge. They were losing the taste war to their sweeter rival, and market share was eroding. In response, they authorized Project Kansas, a $4 million R&D effort to create a new, sweeter formula. After conducting nearly 200,000 blind taste tests, the data was clear. Consumers overwhelmingly preferred the new formula to both Old Coke and Pepsi. Armed with this infallible data, Goizueta made the logical decision to replace the 99-year-old formula. This decision was a complete, unmitigated failure. The public backlash was immediate and violent. The company received over 400,000 angry phone calls and letters. The leadership had made a classic multi-million-dollar mistake. They had listened to what consumers said, but had completely failed to understand what consumers felt. The lesson was brutal. Coca-Cola is not in the beverage business. It is in the emotion and identity business. Consumers were not buying a soft drink. They were buying a piece of American nostalgia, a symbol of post-war optimism, and a piece of their own childhood. The blind taste tests were irrelevant because no one ever drinks Coke blind. They drink the red can, the Spencerian script, and the 100 years of marketing that came with it. By changing the formula, the company had not innovated. It had committed an act of cultural vandalism. The company's recovery from this, the rapid 79-day reversal, and the relaunch of Coca-Cola Classic, was the second part of the lesson. Listen to the customer and be flexible enough to pivot. The public apology and the return of Classic Coke created a surge of brand loyalty, with sales increasing by 10%. The company had accidentally relaunched its own brand and re-cemented its dominance, all by making a terrible mistake and then humbly correcting it. This 1985 failure is the ghost in the machine for the modern company. It is the reason for its $1 billion annual R&D and consumer insight budget. The company now invests massively, not just in taste tests, but in complex consumer insight to avoid ever making a purely data-driven, emotionally illiterate decision again. This lesson in listening directly informed the company's response to its other great crisis, public health. While New Coke was a short-term fire, the growing global criticism of sugar as a driver of obesity and diabetes was a slow-motion existential threat. The company's initial response was to repeat the New Coke mistake. It ignored the emotional cultural shift and relied on data that it, in some cases, helped to fund. The most damaging example was its covert funding of the Global Energy Balance Network in 2015. This independent scientific group, as revealed by media investigations, was heavily funded by Coca-Cola and promoted the message that energy balance was more important than diet. When this was exposed, the public backlash was, once again, intense. The company was seen as manipulative, dishonest, and a bad faith actor, just like the tobacco industry. This scandal, combined with the New Coke failure, taught the company its modern unified lesson: diversify or die. The company realized it could no longer defend its single sugar-based product. It had to pivot its entire business model. This led to the total beverage company strategy, a direct structural lesson learned from its failures. This pivot had already begun with the launch of Diet Coke in 1982, a product that New Coke was meant to complement. After the 1985 failure, this strategy was accelerated. The company realized it needed a portfolio of products to insulate it from the declining sales of its core brand. The launch of Coke Zero in 2005 was the perfection of this lesson. It was a product designed to solve a problem its own R&D had identified. Diet was perceived as female, and zero-sugar male consumers wanted the full taste and masculine branding of classic Coke. This data-driven, segmented approach was the direct, positive outcome of the New Coke failure. This defensive pivot to a total beverage company solved the product problem. The company's massive multi-billion-dollar acquisitions of Minute Maid, Glaceau, Costa Coffee, and its strategic partnership with Monster successfully diversified its revenue streams. It was no longer just a sugar soda company. This portfolio pivot was the internal financial lesson that ensured the company's survival against the 2% domestic saturation of its core product. However, this did not solve the brand problem. The Coca-Cola name itself was still under attack. This led to the second parallel lesson. Cultural relevance is the ultimate brand shield. The company's leadership recognized that its total beverage portfolio was a rational financial defense. It needed an emotional defense. If the product was the source of the health crisis criticism, the brand had to be associated with something so positive that it transcended the product itself. This is the reason for the company's massive diversification into music, sports, and fashion. This was a deliberate, multi-billion-dollar strategy to launder the brand's identity. The company's long-term continuous partnerships with the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup were a lesson in deep structural brand building. This strategy ensures that for billions of people, the Coca-Cola logo is not associated with diabetes, but with global unity and peak athletic achievement. This creates a powerful brand halo that protects the entire portfolio. The modern cultural pivots, such as the high-fashion Kith collaborations and the Coke Studio music platform, are the 21st century evolution of this same lesson. Coke Studio, which generates over 1 billion views, is a $50 million per campaign investment in authenticity. By funding high-quality local music in markets like Asia and the ASEAN region, the company embeds itself in the cultural fabric, making it a local brand, not just an American corporation. This cultural relevance strategy, which drives a 5 to 10% sales increase, is the lesson learned from the new Coke failure. The brand's value is not in its taste, but in its emotional and cultural connection. This leads to the final synthesized lesson of the modern Coca-Cola Company: manage social criticism through proactive PR and diversification. The company learned from the 2015 Global Energy Balance Network scandal that denying or obfuscating science was a losing strategy. The public backlash was too severe. The modern strategy is to accept the health criticism and pivot the narrative. The company's response to the health and water exploitation criticisms is now a two-pronged lesson learned. First, it uses its total beverage portfolio as the proof of its change. It can point to its low-sugar Coke Zero, its vitamin water, and its smart water as evidence that it is part of the solution, not just the problem. This is a direct response to the boycotts that caused 2 to 5% regional sales drops. Second, it uses its massive cultural pivot as the distraction. It pours hundreds of millions of dollars into CSR programs for clean water access and sustainability. It aims for 100% recyclable packaging by 2025 and to use 50% recycled materials by 2030. This, combined with its high-profile sponsorship of the Olympics and FIFA, creates a constant positive news cycle that is designed to drown out the negative health and environmental criticism. The ultimate lesson of Coca-Cola is that a brand this large is no longer a simple product. It is a complex global political and cultural entity. Its survival depends on a delicate balancing act. It learned from New Coke to listen to its customers and respect its own brand's emotional power. It learned from the Pepsi challenge and the health crisis to diversify its portfolio to survive declining core product sales. And it learned from its global operations that it must invest billions in cultural relevance to build a brand shield that protects its entire $45 billion a year enterprise from social and political criticism. This multi-pronged, flexible, and data-driven model is the final lesson, the reason why the brand has not just survived its many crises, but continued to dominate.